I never imagined after my years as a Navy SEAL that I'd find solace in the quiet forests of Oregon. Each morning, as the mist clung to the towering pines, I'd take a moment to appreciate the peace I'd found here. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic battlegrounds I'd known, a sanctuary where my demons could no longer reach me, or so I thought. My transition from military life to civilian was marked by a badge and a gun, as I took on the role of a deputy sheriff. The work was different, yet familiar. It was still about protecting, serving, and sometimes confronting the unexpected. The town, small and secluded, had a charm that could almost make you forget the world outside. The folks here were the kind you'd find in old American tales, hardworking, close-knit, and full of stories. They welcomed me as one of their own, but always with a hint of caution in their eyes. I didn't mind. I was used to being the outsider, the one who carried his past like a shadow. I spent my days patrolling the quiet streets, occasionally dealing with minor disturbances. It was mundane, yet comforting. I'd often find myself at the local diner, sipping coffee and listening to the town's chatter. It was during one of these visits that I first heard the whispers of the mountains. The Cascade Mountains were a majestic backdrop to our little town. They stood tall and mysterious, holding secrets I'd yet to uncover. The locals often spoke of them in hushed tones, sharing tales that had been passed down through generations. Tales of strange occurrences, unexplained sights, and sounds that didn't belong to any known creature. I initially brushed off these stories as folklore, the kind of tales every small town seemed to cherish. But there was a consistency in their fear, a collective unease that made me wonder. As a man trained to trust facts over fiction, I found these tales intriguing, but not alarming. That was until I decided to venture into those mountains myself. It was a personal pilgrimage in a way, a journey to visit the final resting place of a close friend, a fellow SEAL who had found his peace in these woods years ago. I'd buried him there myself, in a spot he had once described as heaven on earth. It was my way of honoring him, a promise kept. As I prepared for the hike, I felt a strange sense of excitement mixed with apprehension. The town's tales echoed in my mind, but I shrugged them off. After all, I was trained to face far greater threats than shadows and whispers. Little did I know, as I stepped into the embrace of those ancient trees, that I was walking into a story that would challenge everything I believed in. The morning air was crisp as I started my hike into the Cascade Mountains. There's a unique stillness in the wilderness at dawn, a serene quiet that I've always found comforting. As a former SEAL, I was trained to be vigilant, to listen to the silence, but out here, it was different. It was peaceful. My destination was a few miles in, a secluded spot known only to a few. The path was rough, rarely traveled, winding through dense forests and overgrown trails. The deeper I went, the more I felt disconnected from the world I knew, stepping into a realm that seemed untouched by time. As I trekked, my thoughts wandered to my friend, the one who had brought me to this place years ago. He had loved these woods, said they spoke to him in a way nothing else did. I never quite understood it back then, but now, surrounded by the towering trees and the quiet majesty of nature, I began to grasp what he meant. It was mid-morning when I first noticed something odd. Carved into the bark of a tree, almost hidden by overgrown branches, was a symbol I couldn't recognize. It was crude, ancient-looking. Curiosity piqued. I scanned the area and found more. They weren't natural, that much was clear. Someone, or something, had made them. Further on, I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. It was old, the remains of a fire pit blackened and cold, the tent torn and weathered. Something about it felt wrong, like whoever had been here had left in a hurry, or perhaps hadn't left at all. I shivered despite the mild air. Then, there it was, the first glimpse. Through the thick foliage, I saw a figure, tall and imposing, standing behind a tree. It looked human, but something in my gut told me it wasn't. I called out, thinking maybe it was a lost hiker. No response. As I approached, It vanished into the woods. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It couldn't be what the townsfolk talked about, could it? The logical part of my brain scolded me for even considering it. But the image was burned into my mind, too real to dismiss. With a mix of skepticism and an inexplicable urge to know more, I decided to follow the trail the figure had left. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, it was heading deeper into the mountains. I knew I should turn back, but my friend's words echoed in my head. There's more to these woods than you can see. So, I pressed on, driven by a need for answers. The further I went, the more I felt like I was stepping into a different world. A world where the tales of the townsfolk might just be more than stories. And as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I realized I was no longer the hunter, but perhaps the hunted. The forest seemed to change as the sun started its descent, casting long shadows that danced between the trees. The comforting silence of the day turned into a chorus of nocturnal sounds, a reminder that the wilderness is never truly silent. I pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and unease. My SEAL training had prepared me for many things, but this felt different. The woods felt alive, aware of my presence. Every snapped twig under my boot, every rustle of leaves seemed amplified in the gathering darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, followed by unseen ease. As night fully enveloped the forest, my senses heightened. I switched on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I heard it, a deep, guttural sound, unlike any animal I knew. It was distant but close enough to send a chill down my spine. The sound was followed by a heavy thud, like something large moving through the underbrush. I stopped, listening, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sounds. They seemed to come from all around, disorienting in the dense woods. It was then that I realized I might not be alone. I remembered the local tales, the warnings, but as a man of action, I refused to succumb to fear. I needed to see, to understand. I continued more cautiously now, every sense alert. The forest felt different in the darkness, more menacing, as if it held secrets that weren't meant to be uncovered. My mind raced with possibilities, trying to rationalize what I was experiencing. But deep down, I knew I was facing something beyond my understanding. It wasn't long before I found more signs of the creature's presence. Large footprints, unlike any I'd seen before, imprinted deeply into the soft earth. They were fresh, leading deeper into the heart of the forest. I followed them, my military instincts kicking in, tracking what I still hoped was just an elusive animal. But as I moved, the sounds grew closer, more frequent. The snapping of large branches, heavy steps, an occasional grunt. It was as if the creature knew I was there, playing a game of cat and mouse with me. I couldn't see it, but I felt its presence, looming just beyond the reach of my flashlight. That night, as I made my way through the dark, foreboding forest, I realized that I was no longer the predator. I was the prey, part of a hunt that I didn't fully understand. And as the night grew darker, so did my sense of dread, leaving me to wonder what lay ahead in the shadows of the Cascade Mountains. The darkness of the night was complete, enveloping the forest in a cloak of mystery and fear. My flashlight seemed feeble against the overwhelming blackness. Each step I took felt heavier, burdened not just by my gear, but by the growing realization that I was in a situation I couldn't control. The sounds were getting closer now, more aggressive. The snapping of branches was no longer just an occasional disturbance, but a constant, unnerving reminder that something was out there with me. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I reverted to my SEAL training, focusing on survival. Then, without warning, a massive tree crashed to the ground just meters away from me. The sound was deafening, the impact sending a shockwave through the ground. I was frozen in place for a moment, disbelief mingling with fear. This was no ordinary animal behavior. It was almost tactical, as if the creature was trying to herd me, control my movements. I started to move, my steps quickening into a jog, then a run. I could hear it behind me, the heavy thuds of its steps matching my pace. Panic set in, a feeling I hadn't known since my days in combat. I was being hunted, chased through the darkness by something I couldn't even see. The chase felt endless, a nightmarish loop of fear and exertion. I dodged through trees, leaped over fallen logs, my breath ragged in my throat. Every instinct told me to fight, but how do you fight an enemy you can't see, one that seemed to be toying with you? As I ran, my mind raced with questions. What was this creature? Why was it pursuing me? The tales of the townsfolk, once just stories, now felt like eerie premonitions. I remembered their warnings, their veiled fear, and I cursed myself for not heeding them. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I saw a break in the trees, a clearing. I burst into the open space, my lungs burning, and stopped to catch my breath. For a moment there was silence. I scanned the tree line, flashlight piercing the darkness, but saw nothing. Had I lost it? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A deer, wide-eyed and panting, emerged from the woods, its gaze fixed behind me. Before I could react, it bolted across the clearing and disappeared into the night. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. Whatever was chasing me was still there, just beyond the shadows. With a renewed sense of urgency, I turned and ran. I ran as if my life depended on it, because in that moment, I believed it did. I needed to get back to my car, back to safety. The woods were no longer a place of peace and solace. They had become a labyrinth of fear and danger. And as I fled, the sounds of the forest echoed behind me, a haunting chorus to my desperate escape. I reached my car just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Exhausted, both physically and mentally, I leaned against the vehicle, trying to process what had just happened. The forest, now bathed in the soft morning light, seemed peaceful again, its nocturnal terror fading like a bad dream. But the fear inside me lingered. I drove back to town in silence, my mind replaying the night's events. I needed to talk to someone, and I knew just the person. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of the force, had always been a source of wisdom and guidance. If anyone would understand, it would be him. Entering the sheriff's office, I found him at his desk, sipping his morning coffee. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. "You look like hell, Jack," he said gruffly. I took a deep breath and recounted my experience in the mountains, not omitting a single detail. The sheriff listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a long sigh escaping his lips. "I was hoping you wouldn't get tangled up in this," he said, his voice heavy with a mixture of concern and resignation. He then shared what he knew. Reports of strange sightings and unexplained noises in the Cascade Mountains were not new. They went back years, even decades. Hikers, campers, even a few locals had similar stories, but none were as close an encounter as mine. The sheriff had always treated these reports with a healthy skepticism, attributing them to wild animals or overactive imaginations. But the frequency of these incidents, coupled with the recent spate of disappearances, had begun to weigh on him. "There's something out there, Jack," he admitted. "I don't know what it is, but it's not just an old wives' tale." He warned me to stay away from the mountains, at least for a while. But he knew, just as I did, that I couldn't, let it go. Something was out there, something that defied explanation, and it had chosen to reveal itself to me. As I left his office, the sheriff's words echoed in my mind. I was dealing with something unknown, potentially dangerous. But the mystery of it, the challenge, was something I couldn't turn away from. I needed answers, and I knew the only way to get them was to go back into the heart of the mystery, the Cascade Mountains. My decision was made. I would return to the mountains, but this time I would be prepared. I would use all my skills, all my training, to uncover the truth. Little did I know, my journey was just beginning, and the real test of my courage and resolve lay ahead. In the days that followed, I prepared for my return to the mountains. I gathered supplies, mapped out my route, and researched every piece of information I could find about the area and its history. That's when I came across a name that kept surfacing in various reports, an old hunter known to have extensive knowledge of the Cascades. I tracked him down to a cabin on the outskirts of town. He was a reclusive figure, known to few, and spoken of in whispers. His name was Elias. Age had bent his frame, but his eyes were sharp, piercing through me as if he could read my intentions. Elias invited me in with a nod, and we sat by his fireplace. The walls of his cabin were adorned with maps of the mountains and old newspaper clippings about unexplained phenomena. He listened quietly as I recounted my encounter, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he let out a long, thoughtful sigh. "You've seen the Watcher of the Woods," he said, his voice a low rasp. He then shared stories passed down through generations, tales of a creature that guarded the mountains, a being not of this world. His ancestors had respected it, feared it, and above all, avoided it. Elias spoke of ancient legends, of rituals performed by the native tribes, and of a pact made with something beyond our understanding. He believed that the creature I encountered was connected to these old stories, a guardian of secrets and sacred lands. The old hunter warned me of the dangers, not just from the creature but from the unknown forces it represented. He had seen many go into the mountains seeking answers, only to never return. But he also saw in me a determination he recognized, the resolve of a man who wouldn't be dissuaded. Before I left, Elias handed me an old, worn compass. "This won't point north in those woods," he said, "but it might just keep you from getting lost." It was an odd gift, but I accepted it, sensing the significance behind his gesture. I left the cabin with a mix of fear and fascination. The stories Elias shared added layers to the mystery, painting a picture of a world that existed alongside ours, hidden in the depths of the Cascades. I realized then that my quest for answers was not just a physical journey, but a venture into the unknown realms of legend and lore. As I headed back to town, my resolve hardened. I would venture back into the mountains, armed with knowledge, respect for the unknown, and a desire to uncover the truth. Little did I know that my next encounter would bring me face to face with the very heart of the mystery. The day I ventured back into the Cascade Mountains felt like a journey into a different world. I was armed not just with my gear, but with the knowledge and warnings given to me by Elias. The old hunter's words echoed in my mind as I followed the trail deeper into the forest. The wilderness was as beautiful as it was foreboding, a pristine labyrinth that hid its secrets well. I moved with purpose, guided by a mix of intuition and the old compass Elias had given me. Its needle spun erratically, reinforcing the sense that these woods were not bound by the usual laws of nature. As I delved deeper, I felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then, in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, I saw it. The creature, the Watcher of the Woods. It stood tall and imposing, its eyes piercing through the shadows. This time, I did not run. I stood my ground, observing it. The creature's gaze held intelligence, an awareness that was unsettling. It was not just a wild animal. It was something else, something more. I slowly reached for my camera, determined to document this encounter. As I raised it, the creature let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air. It was a warning, a clear sign that I was treading on forbidden ground. In that moment, I made a decision. I lowered the camera, showing that I meant no harm. I remembered Elias's words about respect and understanding. This creature, this guardian of the mountains, was a part of the land's ancient tapestry, and I was an intruder in its realm. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff, until the creature turned and disappeared into the forest. I didn't follow. I had my encounter, my proof, but I also had a newfound respect for the mysteries of these mountains. I made my way back, the forest seeming to watch my every move. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. What was the creature? A guardian, a spirit, or something else entirely? And what was its purpose in these woods? I returned to town with a story that would be hard to believe, yet impossible to dismiss. My experience in the Cascade Mountains had changed me, opened my eyes to possibilities I had never considered. But one thing was clear. There were mysteries in this world that were beyond our understanding, and sometimes they demanded our respect more than our curiosity. As I sat down that night, reflecting on my journey, I realized that my search for answers had led me to something greater, a confrontation with the unknown, and an encounter that would stay with me for the rest of my life. The Cascade Mountains had revealed their secret, but they also kept many more hidden in the depths of their forests. In the days following my return from the Cascade Mountains, I found myself in a state of introspective solitude. The encounter with the creature had left an indelible mark on my psyche. I grappled with the reality of what I'd experienced, struggling to fit it into my understanding of the world. The town seemed different to me now. The streets and faces that once felt familiar were now tinged with the knowledge of the unseen mysteries that lay just beyond. I wondered how many others knew, how many carried the secrets of the mountains in silent reverence. I attempted to share my story with a few close confidants, but words failed to capture the essence of my experience. It wasn't just about seeing a creature, it was about confronting the unknown, about the realization that there are forces at play in our world that defy explanation. The sheriff listened to my account with a thoughtful expression. He didn't doubt my word, but I could tell he was wrestling with the implications. "Maybe some things are better left alone, Jack," he said finally. His words echoed the sentiment of the town, a community living in the shadow of something beyond their comprehension. The old compass from Elias sat on my desk, a reminder of my journey and the lessons learned. I often found myself staring at it, lost in thought. The experience in the mountains had changed something fundamental in me. I had sought answers but found more questions, a deeper mystery that went beyond a simple creature in the woods. As the days turned into weeks, I found a certain peace in accepting the unknown. The encounter in the mountains became a part of me, a private chapter in the story of my life. I continued my duties as a deputy sheriff with a new perspective, respecting the boundaries between our world and the mysterious that lay just beyond. The Cascade Mountains remained a silent, looming presence on the horizon, a land of uncharted mysteries and ancient secrets. I knew I would never venture into their depths again, but the allure remained. They stood as a testament to the mysteries of our world, to the wonders and terrors that exist in the shadows. In the quiet moments, I often found myself gazing towards the mountains, pondering the mysteries they held. The creature, the watcher of the woods, had shown me a glimpse of something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. It was a reminder that there is more to this world than we can see or understand, and sometimes the greatest adventure lies in the embrace of the unknown. And so, my story ends, not with answers, but with a newfound respect for the mysteries of the natural world. The Cascade Mountains would continue to stand, silent and majestic, keeping their secrets, as I carried on with my life, forever changed by the brief encounter in their ancient forests.